me, it sort of means you really care a lot and you're not a dick. I think anyone that thinks they're going to achieve anything at all and not make loads of mistakes is just full of shit, right? Because it's just not going to happen. I just think we're nowhere near done. It's just it's so much room for it to get better yet, you know?
Fumbling, lost all track of space and time.
Dave, welcome to the Trusted Podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm very proud and privileged to be joining you this afternoon.
Thank you. Well, we usually ask if this is people's first episode, but I know that you're a bit of a podcast guru. I've seen you all over the place, so this should be water off a duck's back for you.
We'll see. Yeah. I don't know if you never was such a challenging, successful kind of leadership. I don't think, and a double act as well.
Exactly. Well, two for the price of one today, Dave. And when we speak to our guests, we're always interested in people's background. And when we were doing a bit of research, LinkedIn would tell you that you went straight from trainee actuary into the chief exec of Nucleus. I'm sure there's a bit more behind it. If you could just tell us a little bit more about how that journey looked, that would be brilliant.
Yeah, sure. So I did at university I did actuarial maths and statistics, which is just about as dull as it sounds. And I started the professional exams after that. At school, I've been into maths and computers and stuff. It's kind of a slightly interesting story, which might be interesting, where we were the first year in Scotland that ever did O grades, O levels, computer science. We were pilot class at our school when we were in 1984 or something. And we were so lucky as a maths teacher took the course, but he'd actually previously worked for Apple in those days. So we had the first ever computer science class, and it kind of got us all, a whole class got really into it. And a lot of us actually went on to do something kind of vaguely technology led. So did that. So left university, worked for an insurance company called Life Association of Scotland for 2 or 3 years. It was acquired by Britannia Life, probably both inside Phoenix, I'd imagine now, somewhere in that thing. And then went to work with a guy called John Allison and John Newell and a guy called Barry Nielsen. Actually, I think you'll know these guys. I think who were going to a company called Ivory and Simon to build a sort of kind of almost like a platform business based around investment trusts. Well, we're looking a bit like a platform business now, but obviously by technology standards in the mid-90s. And then was part of the team that set up Scottish Life International, which is now RL360. And by that time, I'd become more of a sort of product development, marketing type person. Probably moved away from the actuarial stuff. And then Philip and I had the idea for Nucleus in about 1998 when we were working at Scottish Life International. And unlike these days, when the world is very there's a kind of founder mentality and there's a kind of market for raising money for startups in this kind of industry. That wasn't really the case then. So we had a consultancy business we ran for what ended up being about 7 years, doing product development and strategy consultancy for insurance companies and asset managers. And we actually did some of the work that kicked off the with profit review for the FSA at the time. And during that period, we were trying to raise money for Nucleus, but it took 7 years of just, it wasn't like solid because we were kind of working at the same time. But then Nucleus started in 2006. Yeah.
Where did you find the confidence to start the business, Dave? One of the most recurring themes that comes up in the conversations and podcasts that we've had so far is around imposter syndrome and how to challenge that. It never really goes away. So I'd be really interested to understand that kind of initial leap, how you got into it.
It's a great question. And I'm not sure confidence. I always think imposter syndrome is a funny expression, right? Because a lot of people have it. And I always think the people who are aware of it, almost by definition, they're not imposters. Because to me, it sort of means you really care a lot and you're not a dick. And that's kind of what it means, right? So it's a thing you should actually be quite proud of, really, whereas the people who don't have it tend to be overconfident and full of shit, so it works the other way. So I think the reason we were confident, I'm not sure we were that confident, the reason we had belief in it, maybe choose as a word, is we thought at the time that, and somewhat true to this day actually, we felt that financial advisors would move through a world where they used to sell products on behalf of providers, all that stuff, before you guys were too young, but remember, and it felt like too many of them were still too reliant on product providers and were unwilling to take control of their business and really put the client center stage. I felt that was such an obvious thing that had to happen. And we'd seen the internet emerge, in a widespread way in the mid-90s through the early 2000s, and it seemed it was having a really positive impact on every single industry apart from ours, and you still have these product providers who called all the shots. And if I go back and look, I occasionally go back actually just for fun and look at the original Nucleus business plan. And it's actually quite sad because some of the themes, it's 20 years ago, right? And some of the themes still, frankly, pervade today. But we just felt that there had to be a one directional thing where the client was the central focus of what we're trying to do. And once advisors put themselves on the customer side of the table rather than the product provider side of the table, that'd be a really positive thing. And you began to see some people do it anyway. And by the time we were building Nucleus, Ian and the guys and Mike had got Transact off the ground and moving and started to prove the point. And this was obviously long before the RDR. So lots of people kind of running years ahead of the regulator, just going, sorry, we're going to put the customer first. You guys can catch up later, but we're going to go do this anyway. So it felt there was a groundswell of people thinking that way. And all we were really doing was say, well, we think we can bring some technology to bear and actually an ownership model that puts more control in the hands of advisors as well. That says we're going to sort of catalyze this change that seems to be happening anyway. So that was probably the kind of how we thought about it.
What we do see in the sales world is that there's lots of different routes for people to follow. Whether it's going to go into senior leadership or whether they're going to move into a different part of that business. But a big aspect is moving on to become entrepreneurs and set the business up. Whether that becomes an IFA or whether they go down a different route. What more can we do as a profession to help kind of foster that entrepreneurship?
Yeah, look, I think it's really interesting. It's interesting in the space thing because if you go back long enough, most of the people who founded businesses would have been technical people. They'd have been actuaries and accountants and whatever. And I think it's changed now, and you have more entrepreneurial people leading these businesses. And obviously Abraham being a great example in your own business. And I think anyone that can see a market opportunity and thinks they can execute it, whether they work in sales or wherever they work, I think is entitled to get on with that. I actually struggle with the opposite view where sometimes people will say, I want to be an entrepreneur, I want to be a founder. So, well, to solve what? It's a weird, vacuous statement to make unless you've got identified a problem you think the world needs your skills to resolve, right? So I think, and actually, as you know, people in sales type roles, distribution roles, tend to be very close to the problems that their customers are trying to solve. They have a proximity to it, which is way greater than, someone working as a software engineer typically, or further down the track, or someone who's, doing the financial reports or whatever. So I think people that are paying in sales roles who are paying close attention to what their customers' pain points are, whether it be in technology or investments or probably any industry, frankly, I think have got a really sort of uniquely positioned actually to have that. Now, when they go and think about starting a business, to have the skills to be able to do that or think about how to go about that often might be something they haven't done because they haven't seen that side of the business, right? And I think then you've got to realize you've got to have other people around about you or alongside you who are going to, bring those other dimensions to the team. So if you're a really great commercial or salesperson, maybe you need someone who's better on technology or business operations or finance or whatever it might be. So I think I'm a great believer in, kind of cultivating a collective team that does this stuff. Because if you're going to build a business of any substance, no one's ever going to do it on their own,
Yeah, definitely. I guess sticking with the entrepreneurship theme, when we look at your background, Dave, with Nucleus and then Seccl, you really attracted to kind of these smaller businesses and taking them through those growth stages. What would you say attracts you to them, and how do other people who have started out in business, how can they exponentially grow that as well? What tips have you got for them on that side?
I guess I'm attracted to them because that's where change tends to happen. And if you have if your view of what's possible is different to what's here today, then you've got to affect some change and make something happen, right? And you can do that in some big companies, and some big companies do change, and some change reasonably quickly, but most of them change very slowly, and they tend to, have a weight of incumbency upon them, which just makes it really difficult for them. It's funny, when I left Nucleus, I had no idea what I was going to do after that. I had literally no clue. And I spoke to various people, and some were bigger organizations and some were pure startups. And actually Seccl was a sweet spot where it was a little bit further down the track, and it wasn't a pure startup by then. It was probably 4 years in or something like that, and it didn't feel like going right back to the very beginning. Because one thing I would say is when you go into like the real day zero of a company, it's extremely hard work. We all work really hard here anyway, but it's extremely tough, And it's very exciting, but by the time I was coming to Seccl, I was whatever, 52, not 35. And in real life and I think when I started Nucleus, I was kind of single, had no kids. And then when I started, and then I was married and 2 kids. So, there's a thing about it, I think some people can get really lucky and unlucky just how the life's set up for some of these things. Because if you go and start a new business trying to have a big impact and you've got a whole bunch of stuff in your personal life or whatever it is, or maybe you've not got your health, or, I think it's really tough. So I think it's quite a big part of it, to be honest, of preparing the ground and thinking pretty hard about, is this the right time in my life to be doing this, or how can I make it the right time in my life to be doing it? So, if you've, maybe you don't have the luxury of the financial freedom of not earning any money for 6 months or whatever it might be, or you don't have the time to put in, 80 or 100 hours a week for the first year or two, then it's going to be, you're probably going to fail, so that's the reality of it, because it is really tough. And you then get to the point where, maybe if you're scaling it and you're bringing in investors, that sort of stuff, dynamics change again, and you might not be the right person to deal with the investors, but you might still be the best person to lead the business, and then how do you evolve the whole thing? So I'm actually a great believer in the, Kirsty, who works for us on the people side. She talks about careers being jungle gyms, not step ladders, and I think building a company is a bit the same. Actually, it's not a linear process; it's a very flexible thing, or can be anyway, and that's you got to be prepared for that, I think. And I kind of lucky, actually, I guess, because I've done some of these things. Quite a lot of people might ask for a bit of a bit of my time of coaching or mentoring. It's really fascinating to spend time trying to help people navigate some of these issues. To be honest, I find it really fulfilling.
Yeah, me and Will have had a similar experience. Obviously, we've been involved at different stages, but if you take our background, we were at a FTSE 250 PLC, joining Timeline, Will just before me afterwards, but still a very small company. And it's, for me, having only worked at bigger businesses, it was so eye-opening seeing how much more stuff you get involved with. You're not just coming across the sales, you're involved with marketing, you're involved with product, everything. So it's a more holistic view of how a business is run, which has really benefited both of us. Yeah,
it's really fascinating, and it's not for everybody either. Some people just would freak out with this stuff. It's funny, when I joined Seccl, it was in COVID, right? Still, it was and there were still I think we had about 80 people in the business at the time, split between Bath and London. And I'll never forget my first day. I walked in the office, it was a Monday, and of course hardly anyone goes in the office, so I didn't know what to do. I hadn't joined a company with more than 6 people since I was 21, and I was like, I don't know what, should I say something, or should I make a coffee? This is just the oddest experience. So I think all that is totally fair. And I remember in Nucleus and here as well, actually, we had people join from big companies thinking, I've heard about the culture, I want to be part of this. And then they actually didn't. They thought they wanted to be part of it, but when they actually got here, it was like, this is going to be difficult. This isn't going to work, because you've been attracted to something that you think you can adapt to, and it turns out you can't. And those things happen probably more frequently than you'd think. And it's often easier to take people who are on the way up, who are earlier, got less of an expectation of how a company should be. That's exactly as you guys have done, I guess, actually in your current place, where you're like, okay, well, you've seen what a big company can be like, and you've got the energy and the hunger, and you've got sort of enough expertise to know how it could or should be, but you're not so baked into your career and how it has to be, if you like. And whereas other people, you look at Richard, your CFO. He's Richard's probably, I don't know him, roughly the same age as me, been around different places over the years, but he's got a timeline, and certainly looks like he's settled in really well and manages his role there extremely well. So some people can manage that and some people can't.
I think you've got to be careful what you wish for, haven't you? Because there's this, like you say, this dream culture that you've got where it's incredibly flexible and 2 days don't look the same, and actually people thrive in structure much more than they probably realise. This phrase, a calm sea never made a skilled sailor, and all of that kind of stuff. So the opportunities are enormous. If you are able to go in there, it teaches you a lot about resilience and all of that kind of stuff. And you'll have known this from seeing those businesses grow. But sometimes, as you say, we've seen it as well, where people have this idea of what a startup or a growing business looks like, and that it's going to be, beers at your desk on a Thursday afternoon, like you see, how Facebook started and all that kind of stuff. And the reality is it's a lot of graft. It's a lot of hard graft, and you do have to be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, no, totally. And lots of stuff doesn't work the way it should, or doesn't work as well as it could, or whatever. All that, and when something goes wrong, there isn't necessarily a fully mature path to resolving it, because you first time you've done it. It's funny. I think especially those first, depending on the company, I suppose, first 2, 3, 4, 5 years, I think, until you start to build a bit of kind of foundation. And even on a cultural point, I think it's fascinating. I do still an induction meeting with everyone who joins Seccl. Like, this is for everybody to build, right? There's no way that I or anyone else in the senior team is the sole custodian of the culture, right? It just can't be, because you got 200 people, they've got to all feel it and cultivate it and develop it, or it's mad. Now, you might have some people who are a bit louder in that conversation, or a bit more influential, just because who they are, or maybe their tenure with the company. But the idea that the culture is going to remain unaltered for, say, 20 years of a successful business is also nuts, right? Because of course it's going to change, because it has to change, because it'll die if it doesn't change, because everything will be loose, and it'll fall apart forever if you keep on having a pure startup culture the whole time. So, and sometimes people will, complain about things starting to slow down, but you're building something of real substance, and that requires some foundation sometime, right? And it won't be quite the same as when you used to just shout across the desk and say, go and do this, because it can't be that way anymore, right? Because it's a regulated business, and you're trying to build something. I don't know I wouldn't want to know what your big massive target. If you're trying to build like 100 billion to 500 billion pound business, $1 trillion business, ain't going to do that with a bunch of guys shouting across the table at each other. It's not going to work, right? Because it's going to break. And I think even when you make those changes and you put in those, sort of foundational pieces, whatever you want to call them, I think being really deliberate and explaining why that's happening is really important, because some people, especially people who might be there in the beginning, will resist it and be like, oh, it used to be so much easier here. And it's like, well, yeah, we'll go and work there again, because that company was failing. If it stayed that size forever, it would have failed, right? So, and you got to realize you want to move on. So I think I remember at Nucleus, actually, at one point we moved into a new office, and in Edinburgh, we had 30 people at that time, but we then, the office had space maybe for, I can't remember, 80, say, or something like that. And everyone was like, why on earth would we ever hire 80 people? Why would we need 80 people? Of course, you just do. And you can have loads of tech and loads of automation, but you still need more than a handful of people to build a great business,
Yeah, exactly. And on the people side of things, across your career, you've undoubtedly spoken to either working with great salespeople or working akin with some great salespeople. What is it that makes those salespeople successful, and where do people involved in the distribution model fall down?
I would say the ones that are most successful, and slightly touched on this earlier, I suppose, are the ones who genuinely want to help their clients, whatever their clients are doing, whether it be IFAs or banks or whatever, who invest in themselves to understand the problem their client's trying to solve, and really think quite deeply about that, and be very happy actually to say, look, the thing we're doing at the moment isn't right for you either. We don't have to. And I read something that today, actually, there's a guy, James Barker, does a lot of stuff on fintech sales. I don't know if you see him, and he was talking about, a lot of, especially when you're selling into bigger companies, a lot of the success actually has its origins in the moments when you're not selling, and you're just understanding the business and building some form of trust between you and the firm. So the converse, I think, where people don't go well is where they jump in and it's like, right, I need to speak to you about something, and I'm trying to sell you before I get to even know whether you've got a problem, and it's just too punchy, It just doesn't. Well, for me, if I'm on receive of it, it just puts me off completely. I'm not even interested in that. I think that must be pretty widely held human thought. So I think, understanding what it is, where your thing can fit or not in their business, and then obviously I think as well as a piece, if you start to get some traction on that, again, just trying to be super honest, have a lot of humility about whether it's, how it's going to be deployed, maybe the level of maturity it's at just now. So if it's a younger stage company, don't pretend it's finished or it's going to be the finished article anytime soon, because it's going to take, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it is, and make sure people know that. I think, classic sort of try and if wherever you can, with your best knowledge to under promise and trust the company to over deliver. And then it's a really interesting bit as well, I think, which different companies do in different ways, where the handoff from the sales or distribution team into the sort of, whether you call it account management team or customer success team, how does that work and how smooth is that? And if the client's frustrated or pissed off, whatever, is it okay for them to come back? Does a salesperson tend to keep in touch anyway? And rather, I think sometimes the salesperson will do the job, sell it, and then move on to the next one. And I think there's a lot of value. We're in our industry, we're in a long-term industry here, and these relationships tend to endure for 5, 10, 20, 30 years sometimes, and you don't really want to be too transactional, I don't think.
Yeah, me and Will have only been in the industry for about 7 or 8 years, but we've certainly seen that change since we've been in, and I'm guessing you'll have seen it even more profoundly when you look back over 10, 20 years of it, moving to this more kind of consultative, helping the end client, i.e. firm, with their values, with their business model, rather than just selling to them. What do you think the next layer of that is? What does the future look like? How do we keep continuing and building on distribution?
Yeah, well, I think it is that further development. I remember even years ago, this might be even 10 years ago, we learned, maybe 15 years ago, we learned that, for example, Transact at the time didn't have a bonus. Its bonus scheme for the sales team wasn't based on inflows, right? So we were based more. I don't know what it was actually based on, but or maybe it was based on collective inflows rather than individual something. It was kind of, because the idea was we're going to hire people who are going to do a great consultative type sell into a business, and it doesn't mean we want people who never generate any inflows, right? Because obviously that's not what they're there for. But we also recognise the decision-making process, the adoption of this thing isn't going to be overnight, right? So we should have a slightly more qualitative appraisal. Now, there's obviously a balance between incentivizing people to sell, because that's that is part of the commercial edge of this whole thing. You don't want to just turn it off altogether. But yeah, I would have thought anything that promotes sort of more time to learn, more time for development, more time to better understand customers' problems, so that when you walk up in the room, it's actually having a proper conversation with senior people in the firm. You're not just kind of, again, coming across a bit pushy or a bit, I'm going to hit my bonus this month, so I really need you to do this. I think that, to me, that's a kind of negative vibe of that sort of thing. But so I think if you were thinking of how you build a sales team now, certainly how we think about it here, we want people to really deeply understand the industry they're working in, really have authority and sort of authenticity on kind of what they say and what they contribute to discussion. To be honest, I think, Mark, that's how I look at it, and I guess that's something of a never ending. Right? And finally, we would go well beyond that. We'd expect our even our whatever risk and compliance people to know that sort of stuff, and so and then when the sales team pull in the the in-house experts on in your business, if you get, say, Nicky goes out or to go and see somebody at a firm, they'll have a confidence in front of clients. They're not just going to crumble and be like, well, I'm an investment person, I don't do this. So you want the company to be confident in its product all the way through. So if you've been in the sales team and you've oversold it, and then Nicky goes in to tell her version of it, and then it's like, well, that's not what you told me. It immediately falls apart, right? So you want this thread of truth to run right through, so you can, certainly for us, if we're selling to bigger clients, banks and big organizations, you're going through pretty stringent RFP processes, a lot of governance, and if you've told them you can do something and you can't, you just totally waste everybody's time. There's no way you're going to get past the point without it being unearthed. So yeah, I think more of that. So whereas and all of that, if you go back 20, 30 years, where it was very transactional, it's like, I'm going to sell you an insurance product and I'm going to get paid 200 quid if I can close this today, right? And I think we've just been on this journey for, I think it must be 20. It must have started to change 20 years ago. I think probably 20. Well, when did Transact start? 2000, I think 1999. So 20. I think we're probably 25 years into this, albeit that was a very small niche at the time, obviously, and more of the same, I think. Yeah, it's funny actually. I talked about Barry Nielsen earlier. He ran the commercial team at Nucleus for many, many years and very successfully, and I think a very, very highly regarded guy. I mean, he came out of Barry was more out of an ops and customer service background, actually. That was the beginning of his career, as I recall. And he was just really customer oriented, and how do we deliver something amazing? So, I guess that's the other thing. People who come into this profession will maybe have roots that are, slightly more in the business, possibly, but they still want to be out there selling.
Makes sense. And just out of curiosity, Dave, we've obviously spoken about different remuneration models for salespeople. We've obviously spoken about culture and what we can do to kind of nurture that. When you see mass turnover in a sales process, you see lots of BDMs, for example, who will do 2-year stints everywhere, and typically you don't necessarily see as much loyalty as you possibly did see during those earlier periods of this kind of professionalized distribution world. Is that a concern for you when you're hiring? It's not necessarily a Seccl thing, but just more for you as an individual.
Yeah, I think it's a general thing on stability of teams. And I say this, we've actually been through a lot of changes in team here, which has not been ideal, actually. We haven't always got it just the way we want it to be, and the company's growing very quickly. So I think it would run right across the team, to be honest. Well, I don't think I would, if we were hiring someone who'd, maybe been through 2 or 3 companies in a short period of time, it wouldn't in and of itself concern me, right? Because they may have a perfectly good reason for that, right? The company's changed direction, or they were slightly missold a job, or that can happen. But I'd want to know why. I think what was the reason, and then I guess kind of form an assessment whether that sounds plausible or otherwise. There'll be some people, because remuneration in sales tends to be more variable than other roles in the business. If people have got an expectation of what they're going to earn, and they're not able to make it because something, the company's not performing, then that's I think a perfectly legitimate reason maybe to move on. If they can't negotiate something better and they're really good at the job, I think that's a perfectly reasonable reason to move on, for example. Similarly, on the flip side, if the product's great and they're not very good at selling it, then that'd be a reason, maybe suggest they're not very good at the job for whatever reason, that maybe just didn't get the right training, or wasn't quite the right time for them, or whatever, or didn't fit in the team. So yeah, it's probably different versions of that. But I mean, having said all that, tenure in all roles is way, way, way shorter than it ever was 20 years, 30 years ago, right? I mean, I remember there's a guy who used to work at Scottish Life with us called, what was his name? Ian Munro. I think he worked there for 48 years, it's like from 16 to, whatever that would have been, that just doesn't happen anymore. So there's obviously an extreme where it gets too short. Equally, I think in Nucleus days, we would have had, I think most of the sales team would have been there for several years, certainly. It was a pretty stable bunch. Felt like a good team, and they were all...
Transact are similar, aren't they? They've got some really long servers who've been through all different shades of that business as well, and it's probably testament to the culture and all of those bits that go with it.
Yeah, I think it's like any team in almost in any discipline you're doing, and sporting team or anything, the core of it, if a core of it can stay together for a prolonged period of time, that'll be a good thing. And as long as it's got a bit of in and outs and people learning from the new people as well, and not being too stuck in their ways, I think can be pretty dangerous to hold teams together for a long time, and no one ever joins it either. That can be a pretty damaging thing, because it just gets a bit stuck and a bit maybe a bit stayed as well, which is probably not a good thing.
Yeah, one of the main things kind of stemming off the back of that as well, Dave, that comes up amongst our viewers is being out in field sales can be really lonely. Obviously, the more remote working that's going on now after COVID, not in the office as much, people at home, working from home, going out doing meetings, feeling isolated. And part of TRUST3D's ethos is to kind of help bridge that gap. What do you think we can do more as a profession to kind of support people in that environment?
Jay, I think it's a brilliant point. And I think it's actually becoming a point that goes actually even beyond. I know this is obviously about distribution and sales, but it goes beyond that, because people working at home in general, I think, have got a bigger problem here now than we maybe fully understand. I think this is a great thing. I think this, I don't know what your plans are for this, if you got like in-person type forums, or people from different companies can get together and chat through the problems or whatever in a coffee shop, whatever it might be. I think all that is good, all those sort of things, and any connections you can make, which are sort of if each company's got a vertical, there's a horizontal between companies. I think that's a great thing, whether it be online stuff or in person. I think it's really healthy when people from different companies know each other, and different, whether they're competitors or whether just slightly different parts of the value chain, can all work really, really well, I think. So I think anything like that is entirely positive, to be honest. I mean, I think this venture you set up here, it's probably the first time I've seen something quite like this for people in your part of the sector. I think you tend to got groups like I've seen technology stuff, or there's it's maybe like women in platforms and stuff like that. It's quite niche in the platform sector, obviously for females, but I think it's actually an open shop, if you like. But you've got a few of those sort of things. There's a kind of women in banking and finance, but I think it's the first one I've seen where it's all kind of sales professionals. I think it's certainly the first I'm aware of. So I think it's a great thing. And then recognizing, because I remember again, Nucleus had originally a sales team like 3 or 4, but they were the only 4 people who didn't work in the office every day. It was like we maybe had 120 people, and there were at the time, and there were one guy who lived in Southampton, one guy lived in Midlands, I think it was, and you just never saw anybody. And that was I totally get it. So yeah, and I think as well I think this has changed, but there would have been a mindset as well. If you spoke to the ops team, these guys just get out for lunch every day, right? And they get out for dinner every night, and they're just loose, and they don't do their expenses, and they're full of shit, because we've all seen it, right? And I think what those guys were amazing at, actually, and there's one guy actually very tragically died. Mike Wallace was just outstanding at this. And when Mike came into the office, he spent a lot of time with the head office team, right? And the people that he spent time with, maybe on the phone or on calls or whatever, he didn't like over invest his time when he was in the office to make sure people knew who he was and why he was a great guy and all that sort of stuff, and they all did, but he was especially good at it, I think. So I think there's probably a bit of responsibility on you and your peers as well, not to just be on receive of that stuff as well, and just know you've also got a role to make sure people understand what matters to you and who you are as people. And I think certainly in the old days there would have been a perception, sales team just like take, give me this, I need this. If you do this for me, I'll get this thing closed. And I think making yourself more part of the company, even if you're geographically dispersed, I think is a really good thing to do. Like for example, like if you're having even if you're a sales team gathering of some description, get along with some of the ops people or some of the customer success team, whatever you call them in the businesses, or some of the technology people, and just try and make it not a them and us thing. Because it's certainly, again, if you went to the old days, it was all very them and us, and I think it's probably got better in most cases over the years. But yeah, I think anything you can do like that is better.
Right. Over your career, Dave, you've undoubtedly made some mistakes, but you've also had the opportunity to learn from them. What have those mistakes taught you, and what would you teach the trusted community?
I think if I was to take the themes of the central theme of my mistakes, it would be things where I've had a niggle about something and I've let it run a bit too long, right? And I've maybe not been quick enough to act, or maybe being slightly too optimistic it's going to get better. And that could be anything. It could be about an opportunity. It could be about a member of the team, pricing, whatever, roadmap, priorities, whatever. And I've sort of maybe been slow to have the difficult conversation or roll back on something. It's funny. I've always found it very easy to have an opinion on the industry and why it should improve and what it should do differently. And on just a totally personal level, I think I'm less good at dealing with issues inside the business sometimes as quickly as I sometimes could, and that would be that's probably personal weakness or deficiency, we're going to call it, which can leave some issues can fester a little bit, and so I think if you looked at all the mistakes, I think a lot of them would have that attached to it as a behaviour, if you like, and then obviously when you do make them, it's like, just go, right, I've done it again, don't do it again. So it's like, just try and be really present about it. And it's actually the point we touched on a little bit earlier on, actually, about having the right sort of talent depth in the team, because I think it can happen very easily when you're overstretched and overreaching and you've got 20 things to do and 3 of them feel a bit, it's going to be a nightmare. It's quite easy to focus on 5 of the other ones that are easier. And I think, what's I can't remember the expression, actually. Is it eating the frog or something like that? Is it you talk about? You're supposed to do your first 3, the hardest things you've got in front of you, do them first, and don't leave them till the end. So there's probably something in that, I think.
There's definitely worse deficiencies to have than optimism, Dave. Definitely.
Yeah. No, that is definitely true. No, I do accept that, and I think as well, to put a positive on it, I think anyone that thinks they're going to achieve anything at all and not make loads of mistakes is just full of shit, right? Because it's just not going to happen. And I'm not saying we should. There's sometimes a little bit loose, I think, in the tech space to sort of break things. Move fast and break things? So you can do that sort of. You don't want to blow up the whole company either. There's a limiting argument on that. But I do think if you're going to try and create a space for people to grow, and guys like yourself at your stage of your career and grow in your careers, you've got to give people space. You've got to let them make mistakes. You hopefully support them through it, and let them learn from it. Obviously, encourage them to learn from it. And I think when you get into the dangerous territory, where maybe you've got more of a blame culture. And it's interesting, actually, going back to that point earlier about big companies and small companies. I think you can tend in big companies to get a bit more into that more hierarchical, top-down blame culture type thing, which I think is really damaging. And we used to have a line we used, which was something like, hire great people and throw all the learning you can at them. Sort of respect the learning curve. Just it ain't going to happen tomorrow, right? Someone new joins a business, even if they are not super early career, it's going to take them a while to learn it. How does it work here? What can they bring to the party? Of course, they're going to make mistakes. So sort of celebrate it, but don't over celebrate it either. I think certainly a tech space can get a little bit like, it's amazing to make, let's make hundreds of mistakes. Well, we don't want to do that either. There's a kind of sensible point where you like sort of controlled errors. I think where you can sort of create enough space that if it goes wrong, it's not going to blow the whole thing up. Equally, if I think if it's too narrow, people don't learn. They don't develop. It just doesn't nothing. They just become robots or whatever. Which is kind of really boring to work with.
Yeah. You've over your career, Dave, you've been at the forefront of change at Nucleus and with Seccl as well in terms of financial services and what the landscape looks like now. What excites you most for the future?
Thank you. You're very flattering. Thank you. I think I just think we're nowhere near done. It's so much room for it to get better yet, And it's funny, as you probably know, we recently won the business to run Monzo's investment platform, right? So it's obviously not in the advice space, but if I look at what they are doing as digital journeys and making a brilliant customer experience for non-advised clients, even given the amazing work Timeline's done, frankly, the customer experience you get in Monzo is still better, right? And how do we make the customer experience totally amazing? And it's harder when there's an advisor involved because there's another party. And how do you empower advisors so that their clients get something that's better than Monzo? That feels like a legitimate goal, right? And I would say in general across the whole industry, we haven't done that yet. It's obviously much better in some places than others, but we're not at that yet. And I just think the industry is nowhere near as efficient as it could be. People are still paying too much in fees. If you go back to the aggregate challenge here, how do you make people get more of their money, understand it better, have a better chance of achieving their hopes and dreams? There's no way we can say this is done, right? Maybe it'll never be done, but it doesn't feel like we're even halfway there. So I find that still really interesting, to be honest. And I'm actually particularly interested in this kind of middle ground between advised people and non-advised, and we would expect there'd be something of a convergence occurring there in the coming years. And how does that work? If I look at our kids are 12 and 10 at the moment, and they'll probably never have a final salary pension. Their financial affairs will be more straightforward from the off, and it might be that they don't need to move into that world of advice as early or whatever. So I'm quite interested in how that all plays out and how we make it super easy for people to get more of their money, really.
Dave, this has been incredibly insightful. So for myself and Marcus, I wanted to thank you. Our last piece, with the trusted community who are watching this, what's the one parting message, the one final piece of advice you'd like to leave with our community?
I would say make sure you're working at a company you really believe in, right? And just tell the truth every day. Work for a company that allows you to tell the truth every day. And then you'll just love it. That would be my kind of message, I think.